It began with a drawing. On a cloudy May morning in Lima, a 7-year-old boy named Santiago Lozano sat at his small desk in the back of a public elementary school and began to sketch with the patience of someone twice his age. His teacher, Senora Delgado, remembered later that the room smelled faintly of chalk and damp paper. The other children were drawing houses, animals, the typical scenes of their daily lives. Lima's buses, its plazas, the clutter of television cartoons. Santiago, quiet and steady-handed, drew something else. A sprawling city of spiraled towers and canals, latticed bridges and narrow streets that curved around what looked like enormous circular wells. He filled the page edge to edge, never stopping to erase. When the bell rang, he signed the bottom right corner with a small flourish, something rare for a boy who normally hid his work, and handed it to the teacher without a word. Delgado glanced at it, smiled, and said it looked like a dream. Santiago shook his head. "It's not a dream," he said. "It's a place." At first, no one thought much of it. Children invent worlds all the time. But in the days that followed, Santiago drew the same city again and again. Sometimes the layout changed slightly. Sometimes new structures appeared, as though construction continued in his mind while he slept. Each drawing shared the same architecture: spirals, bridges, and an intricate pattern of canals that seemed too deliberate to be invented by chance. Delgado mentioned it to the headmaster, who shrugged. She mentioned it to the boy's parents during a routine meeting. His father, a civil engineer, laughed softly and said perhaps the boy had inherited an interest in design. His mother smiled, proud and a little uneasy. When the teacher spread the drawings across her desk, the father grew quiet. "These aren't like the places we build," he said. "These are like the ones we lose." That evening, he asked Santiago where he'd learned to draw such things. The boy replied that he hadn't learned them. "I saw them from above," he said, "when the water went away." His parents thought it was a child's way of describing a dream, but the phrasing lingered. A week later, during an open house, one of the drawings fell from a display board. A visiting archaeologist named Dr. Adriana Salazar, who volunteered occasionally for the school's science fairs, picked it up. The detail caught her at once: the bridges, the layout, the wells. She had seen similar sketches only in early colonial records from the Andean coast, maps of settlements swallowed by floods or earthquakes centuries ago. "Do you know what this is?" she asked the teacher. Delgado shrugged. "Just imagination." Salazar asked to meet the boy. Santiago, polite but distant, looked at her carefully when she asked about the city. "It's called Capacmiray," he said, pronouncing the Quechua syllables as if they were common. "My grandfather told me." Delgado later confirmed that neither of the boy's grandparents spoke Quechua. Within weeks, Salazar's curiosity grew into quiet alarm. She invited a linguist and an anthropologist from the university to see the drawings. They agreed that the precision of the structures, especially the spiral wells, echoed pre-Incan hydraulic designs rarely seen outside archaeological surveys of submerged ruins near the northern desert. Yet no known site matched the boy's maps. He had drawn 21 different versions by then, all aligned with uncanny consistency. Santiago's parents allowed the researchers to visit their home, a modest apartment overlooking a narrow street in Miraflores. The boy's room was ordinary except for the wall, covered in pinned sheets of paper, each one depicting another angle of the city. Under the lamp's yellow light, the drawings formed a panorama that seemed almost to breathe. Salazar asked him where he saw it. "In my head," he said, "when it's quiet." When asked to close his eyes and describe it, Santiago began to speak in a low, rhythmic tone. He spoke of light underwater, of a city that shone blue at night, of people who walked with lamps made of air. His phrasing was not poetic. It was factual, the way children report a simple truth. The researchers recorded the session. When they later slowed the tape, they noticed pauses in his breathing that formed a steady pattern. 6 beats, pause, 3 beats, like the cadence of someone recalling coordinates. Salazar contacted the National Archaeological Institute. At first, the response was bureaucratic indifference. Then one of the institute's directors, intrigued by the precision of the maps, agreed to meet the boy. He brought satellite imagery and topographical charts from the northern coastal valleys. When he laid them beside the drawings, a silence settled in the room. The curves of Santiago's canals matched the dry outlines of a floodplain near the Piura River, an area that, according to colonial records, had once hosted a settlement washed away in the 16th century. The discovery stirred cautious excitement. They planned an expedition. Salazar, the director, a field geologist, and a small crew. They told Santiago they would look for his city. He nodded, indifferent, as if they were merely catching up to something he already knew. Before they left, he gave Salazar one last drawing. It showed the city from a higher perspective, with one corner shaded darker than the rest. "That's where the door is," he said. The team reached the Piura Basin in early September. The air smelled of salt and dust. The terrain was desolate, cracked earth, dry channels, the remnants of ancient irrigation. They camped near an area where a satellite image showed faint rectangular impressions beneath the soil. Using ground-penetrating radar, the geologists detected anomalies, voids that suggested collapsed structures. On the third day, under a layer of compacted silt, they uncovered fragments of carved stone bearing spiral patterns identical to those in Santiago's drawings. News traveled fast. A local paper ran a headline, "Boys' drawings lead to lost city beneath the desert." National television picked it up. Cameras arrived, and with them came bureaucracy. The ministry ordered the site sealed pending verification. Salazar returned to Lima exhausted but unable to sleep. She visited Santiago to tell him they had found something. The boy only asked, "Did you find the door?" She said no. "Then it's not finished," he replied. Over the next months, rainfall increased unexpectedly in the Piura region, the kind of rainfall that happens once in decades. The site, still under study, flooded again. The government halted all excavations. Satellite images later showed the ground had shifted, obscuring most of the outlines. Officials declared the project inconclusive and archived the findings. Santiago stopped drawing after that. His teachers noticed the change. His parents said he slept poorly, muttering in his dreams. One night he woke screaming that the water was too loud. They took him to doctors who found nothing wrong. Salazar, unable to let the case rest, reviewed every recording she had made. On one tape, during Santiago's description of the lamps of air, there was a faint background sound, low and oscillating, like water rushing through hollow stone. Acoustic analysis confirmed it was not interference from the room. It matched, with eerie precision, underwater recordings taken years earlier near the ruins off the northern coast. When she played the sound for Santiago, he shook his head. "It's not from there," he said. "It's from below everything." She began to question the limits of coincidence. The data from the site were real. The carvings, the floodplain, the patterns. The child's accuracy defied probability. Yet there was no way to explain it without stepping beyond science. The ministry issued a polite statement citing unverified correlation between cultural memory and artistic expression. The case was closed. Months passed. Then, in the summer of 2004, Salazar received a package with no return address. Inside was a drawing on thick paper, one she hadn't seen before. It showed the same city, but now the canals were filled with black ink. Beneath them, in small, careful letters, was a line written in a child's hand. The door opened when the water rose. The message haunted her. Salazar stared at the paper for hours, trying to decide whether it was Santiago's work or a forgery. The texture of the pencil strokes matched his previous drawings, but the shading, those deep, deliberate lines, suggested urgency rather than calm observation. She called his parents the next day. His mother answered, her voice faint. "Santiago isn't here," she said. "He hasn't been for 3 days. He had gone missing after school, leaving his backpack neatly under the bench outside the courtyard." The security guard remembered him walking toward the river that sliced through the outskirts of Lima. Search parties combed the banks for a week before the city's attention drifted elsewhere. No trace, no witnesses, no footprints. The press speculated about abduction, about runaways, about the cruelty of a city too distracted to notice its children. Salazar said nothing publicly, but she returned to the drawing nightly, tracing the shaded corner again and again. "That's where the door is," the boy had said. Driven by a kind of desperate logic, she reassembled all his previous sketches on her living room wall. When aligned by scale, they formed a coherent layout, one larger than any ruin she'd ever studied. The shaded corner pointed north-northwest. When she overlaid that alignment onto satellite images of the Piura Basin, The coordinates intersected with an old tributary called Rio Seco, long since dried. She decided to go back, alone. The road to the basin was worse now, half eroded by the previous year's floods. Local guides refused to travel at night, muttering that the land made strange noises after sunset. Salazar drove a rented jeep through dust that clung like ash. By twilight, she reached the edge of the dry tributary. The air trembled with heat. Crickets and distant thunder filled the silence. There, beneath a ledge of cracked sediment, she saw it. A depression in the earth forming a perfect circle about 5 meters wide. At its center, a small pit had filled with recent rainwater. She stepped closer and felt a faint tremor underfoot, like the pulse of distant machinery. Kneeling, she brushed away the soil along the rim. Stone emerged, carved in spirals, the same motif from the drawings. She recorded everything on her handheld camera. The footage would later show her hand trembling as she whispered, "It's here." She placed the camera on a rock and climbed down. The air grew colder as she descended, even though the sun was still high. Water trickled from a fissure, running along channels too straight to be natural. When her boot touched the bottom, the ground gave a hollow sound. She crouched and pressed her ear to it. A low hum filled her chest, steady and rhythmic. 6 beats, pause, 3 beats. The same pattern found in the boy's breathing years before. Then the hum stopped. A noise, subtle but unmistakable, rose from below. A splash, as if something vast had shifted under the surface. The water in the pit began to swirl counterclockwise. Salazar stepped back, heart hammering. The spiral carvings caught the light and seemed to shimmer. For a moment, she thought she saw movement beneath the water. Lights, faint and blue, tracing the outlines of towers. She blinked, and they were gone. By the time she climbed out, the sun had dipped low, turning the desert blood red. She packed her gear and drove to the nearest town, half delirious, her hands raw from gripping the wheel. She told herself fatigue had tricked her senses, that reflection and fear had built a mirage. But deep down, she knew that what she had seen was not simply water catching the light. 2 days later, she returned to Lima and tried to contact the ministry again. Her messages went unanswered. When she finally reached the director, he dismissed her claims as atmospheric illusion. "The case is closed, Adriana," he said. "Don't open doors that were meant to stay sealed." That night, unable to sleep, she played the last tape from Santiago again. Halfway through his description, she noticed a faint secondary voice layered under his. It wasn't an echo. It spoke in a slower rhythm, repeating a single phrase in Quechua. "Kipalaktaiku, Nyapakta kaiku." Those from behind are calling the ones ahead. She had it translated 3 times by different scholars. All gave the same result. None could explain why the voice was there. Weeks later, the university's anthropology department received an anonymous envelope addressed to her. Inside were 3 items: a photograph of a muddy riverbank, a child's sandal half buried in silt, and a short note written in uneven handwriting. "The door was open only for me." No one ever proved it was Santiago's. The photo's metadata traced back to a disposable camera found in a flea market near Piura. The stall owner couldn't recall who had sold it. Salazar filed the envelope in her private archive, labeling it simply, "The Last Message." In the years that followed, she abandoned teaching. Her research turned toward the phenomenon of genetic memory, the idea that traces of ancestral knowledge could survive across generations. The academic world smiled politely and nodded, labeling her theories speculative. But she didn't care, because every night, when the city grew quiet, she still heard it. The hum under the floorboards, faint but constant, like water flowing through stone far below. And sometimes, when sleep crept close, she would see a boy standing at the edge of a vast spiral city, holding a lamp made of air, waiting for the world to remember. 5 years passed before anyone spoke publicly of the Piura Basin again. The floods had reshaped the land into new channels, and the field where the spiral pit once lay was now a shallow lagoon covered with reeds. The archaeological permit expired quietly. Salazar left the city for a time, living near the highlands, giving lectures that only a handful of students attended. She avoided interviews, though journalists occasionally sent questions that went unanswered. Then, in 2009, the National Museum received a package with no sender. Wooden crate, sealed, addressed only to Curatorial Department, Pre-Columbian Collections. Inside were 4 stone fragments, each carved with concentric spirals and channels that interlocked perfectly when assembled. The customs declaration listed the origin as Pura Valley, private donation. The stones were soaked in fine silt and bore signs of long submersion. When researchers tested them, the mineral composition matched that of the northern coast. Yet the tool marks indicated methods older than any known culture of the region. The museum invited Salazar as a consultant, aware of her earlier involvement. She arrived without comment, wearing the air of someone who no longer sought to prove anything. When she saw the stones, she said quietly, "These weren't dug up, they surfaced." That same week, a fisherman from a village downriver was brought to the local clinic after collapsing on the shore. He spoke of seeing lights under the water, moving like breath. The doctors attributed it to dehydration and delirium, but his description spread among locals, matching older stories whispered by elders who remembered a saying, "When the water hums, the lost return." Salazar began to gather accounts: farmers who found shards of ceramics after storms, children who claimed to hear music when they pressed their ears to the ground. Her notebooks filled with testimonies that no institution would ever publish. She wrote late into the night, the rain tapping like fingers on the glass, the recordings of Santiago looping softly in the background. By now, the tape hiss had become like a heartbeat to her. One evening, as she sat transcribing, the sound changed. Through the static came the faint hum again. 6 beats, pause, 3 beats, followed by something she had never heard before, the echo of dripping water, and then a voice, not a child's, but unmistakably human, whispering, "It's full now." The noise lasted only a few seconds, but it left her shaking. She played it again and again until the tape wore thin. There was no logical explanation. The recording equipment had been analog, the cassette untouched for years. She sent a copy to a colleague in Spain who specialized in acoustic archaeology. He replied 2 weeks later, "Adriana, this is extraordinary. The background frequency isn't environmental. It's resonant, like an enclosed chamber underwater." The colleague offered to analyze the full tape in his lab. She hesitated, but eventually mailed it to him. Weeks passed without reply. When she called, his assistant said he'd taken a leave of absence. The lab was closed. No record of the tape remained. It was around this time that small tremors began to shake the Piura region again. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to unsettle the water table. Locals reported strange emissions from the new lagoon at night, like vapor glowing faintly blue. Government inspectors blamed phosphorescent algae. One farmer sent Salazar a photograph he'd taken with a disposable camera, rings of light rippling across the surface. In the center, something darker, a shadow, circular, as if a hollow mouth had opened beneath the water. Salazar drove north once more, this time unannounced. The town had changed. Paved roads replaced dirt tracks, new antennas crowned the hills. She reached the lagoon at dusk. The air hung heavy with humidity. The water, dark and still, reflected the last streak of light. She stood there for a long time, waiting for the hum, the flicker, anything. Only the sound of frogs and the slow heartbeat of her own pulse. Then the wind dropped. The surface of the lagoon flattened. The frogs went silent. She felt the vibration through her shoes first. Faint, rhythmic, deep. The pattern was unmistakable. 6 beats, pause, 3 beats. The water trembled. Circles formed outward from the center, where a pale light began to glow. She lifted her camera and took one photograph before the lens fogged from the sudden heat. The light grew brighter, spreading under the water like a pulse. It illuminated what seemed to be a structure. Columns, archways, a perfect spiral descending into darkness. The hum ceased. The glow faded. The water calmed as if nothing had happened. She looked at the image later in her hotel room. It was blurred, grainy, but the light was there, unmistakable. She considered sending it to the ministry again, but she didn't. Instead, she wrote a single line in her notebook. The door opened when the water rose. 3 days later, the hotel clerk found her room empty. Her belongings were neatly packed. On the desk lay her notebook, the photograph, and a letter addressed to no one. If memory survives through blood, then water must also remember. It carries the stories that land forgets. If you ever hear the hum, don't answer. It means the city has not forgiven us." The letter ended without a signature. Months later, during a drought, the lagoon dried almost completely. Excavators found nothing but cracked mud and the faint outline of spirals etched into the ground. They filled with dust as the wind passed over them. Years would go by before anyone mentioned it again. The story dissolved into rumor, another file in the endless bureaucracy of mysteries no one funds. But sometimes, after heavy rain, the river near Piura changes its color, turning a strange, luminous blue, and villagers claim they can hear a hum beneath the current, soft but certain, like the sound of a door breathing open in the dark. Years after the letter was found, what remained of Adriana Salazar's life fit into 2 cardboard boxes in a university archive: field notes, maps, audio cassettes, and a camera whose film had been exposed to heat. The curator who received them catalogued the items under unverified ethno-archaeological material. Piura Basin, 2003-2009. The boxes sat on a steel shelf for over a decade, collecting dust, until a doctoral student named Luis Paredes rediscovered them in 2022. Luis was studying myth persistence, the way unrecorded stories travel across generations. He had never heard of Santiago Lozano or the Hidden City, but one evening, while scanning Salazar's notebooks, he froze. The spirals, the coordinates, the rhythmic markings, everything pointed to a place that, on modern maps, was nothing but an agricultural plain. Intrigued, he digitized the tapes and cleaned their audio. When he enhanced the last recording, the hum emerged again, faint but steady. 6 beats, pause, 3 beats. But now, layered over it, a new sound appeared. Dripping water and what could only be described as breathing. Luis adjusted the filters, convinced it was interference. The breathing grew louder. Then, suddenly, a child's voice whispered something unintelligible, followed by silence. Luis replayed the segment, headphones tight against his ears. The voice was definitely there, and though faint, it seemed to say, in a child's Spanish, "Mira el dibujo." Look at the drawing. He paused, chilled. He had scanned dozens of the drawings into his database, but had not looked at the originals since morning. Pulling one from the box, he turned it over. On the back, almost invisible under the graphite dust, was a faint pencil sketch, lines forming what looked like a map. At the bottom corner, a symbol, a spiral divided by a diagonal line, the same pattern carved on the Piura stones. Luis spent weeks cross-referencing the sketch with satellite imagery. The map corresponded roughly to a section of the desert that had shifted after the floods of 2009. A faint circular discoloration still appeared there in thermal images, as if the ground retained a memory of heat. He requested permission to visit the site. Bureaucracy delayed him for months, but persistence and the quiet enthusiasm of his advisor secured a small grant. In July 2023, he arrived at the location with a drone, a camera, and a single assistant. The air was dry, heavy with static. No water remained, only salt crust and thin reeds swaying in the wind. From above, the drone revealed what the naked eye could not. A perfect spiral, a kilometer wide, carved faintly into the earth. The shape wasn't random. It matched Santiago's earliest drawings exactly. Luis lowered the drone until the image blurred, and for an instant, a pale reflection shimmered across the lens, like light passing through moving water. That night, in the rented house he used as a base, he reviewed the footage frame by frame. At timestamp 02:47, a flash appeared. Zooming in, he saw something impossible. A figure standing at the spiral's center, small and faint, no more than a silhouette. It wasn't there in the frame before or after. He thought it might be a trick of shadow until he enhanced the exposure and saw that the figure's reflection appeared in the dust, as if standing in shallow water. He barely slept. The next morning, he returned with the assistant, but the spiral had vanished under the wind's movement. The ground was smooth, undisturbed. He marked the coordinates and packed his gear, his rational mind clawing for an explanation. Back in Lima, he analyzed the drone's data again. The GPS log showed a brief loss of signal, exactly 33 seconds, coinciding with the moment of the flash. The drone's internal microphone, meant to capture ambient noise, had recorded a low hum. 6 beats, pause, 3 beats, beneath the static. Luis's advisor, an older anthropologist named Valverde, listened without speaking. When the hum ended, Valverde said quietly, "Do you know what that pattern is?" Luis shook his head. "It's the rhythm of the pututus, the conch shell horns the Incas used in rituals for the sea gods," Valverde said. "They blew them in that pattern to call the water back." Luis stared at him. "To call it back from where?" The old man smiled sadly. "From below." That night, unable to rest, Luis dreamed of water rising from the earth, not violently, but as if the land itself exhaled. In the dream, a boy stood at the edge of a vast blue city, his lamp flickering like a heartbeat. When he woke, his pillow was damp, though his room was dry. A week later, while cataloging data, he noticed an anomaly. The paper on which he'd drawn the spiral map was curling at the edges, stained faintly with salt. He wiped it clean, but the residue reappeared the next day. When he finally turned off the lights, his computer monitor glowed faintly blue in the dark, as though submerged. He stopped working on the project after that. His grant expired. He moved to another topic, citing data corruption. But sometimes, in lectures, he found himself distracted by the rhythm of rain against the windows. 6 beats, pause, 3 beats. And his students noticed his eyes drift toward nothing. Years later, when he retired, he donated his own notebooks to the same archive where Salazar's boxes remained. On the final page of his journal, in handwriting pressed so hard it tore the paper, he had written, "The city is not lost. It remembers itself through us." And below that, in smaller, almost trembling letters, "The door is still open." When the archive received Luis's notebooks, no one at first noticed the faint smell of salt water on the paper. The clerk who unpacked them simply noted the condition: mild warping, discoloration along edges. The boxes were placed beside Salazar's old materials and catalogued under a single heading, Pura Basin Correlation Study. For years they sat untouched, silent but not still, like something waiting. It was a young archivist, a woman named Camila Rojas, who reopened them in 2030. She had grown up hearing rumors about the boy who drew the drowned city. Her grandmother had been one of the teachers at Santiago's school in Lima and still spoke of him in hushed tones. When Camilla stumbled upon the files, she felt a strange duty, not professional curiosity, but inheritance. She began digitizing the materials, scanning every page, every photograph. When she ran the film from Luis's drone through modern image software, the resolution cleaned itself into clarity. The spiral in the earth was sharper, almost luminous. She could see patterns of erosion too symmetrical to be natural, concentric terraces descending into what looked like a hollow basin. And in the single frame that Luis had marked as anomaly, the figure was clearer now. It was a child, the outline unmistakable. Camilla froze. She zoomed in until the pixels blurred. The figure's face was indistinct, but she could see the suggestion of hair plastered to a forehead and the shimmer of something in its hand. A small sphere of light, soft and steady, like the flame of a hidden lamp. She sat back from the monitor, heart pounding. The hum from the old tapes began to loop in her head. On instinct, she played one of them, the cleaned version that Luis had labeled Final Sample. The familiar pattern filled the room. 6 beats, pause, 3 beats. Then beneath it, something else. A sound she hadn't heard before. Voices, distant and overlapping, speaking too fast to understand. She slowed the playback. The words were Quechua, broken but urgent. A linguist later translated them for her. The water carries what memory cannot. She kept listening, transfixed. At the very end of the tape, almost buried in static, came a single, isolated sound, a child's voice humming the same rhythm. For weeks, she told no one. She worked after hours, piecing together timelines, digitizing coordinates, reconstructing the spiral's geometry with modern mapping tools. The data aligned perfectly with the new satellite scans of the Piura region. A heat anomaly persisted beneath what had once been the lagoon, a circular pocket 2 kilometers wide, still warmer than the surrounding soil decades after the last flood. The report, filed by the Ministry of Energy, described it as thermal instability of unknown origin. Camilla printed the map and taped it beside Santiago's first drawing. They matched line for line. Even the shaded corner, the door, aligned with the warmest point of the anomaly. She began to dream of water. In the dreams, the city wasn't drowned but suspended. its towers swaying gently as if underwater, yet perfectly intact. She saw people walking through blue corridors, carrying lights that pulsed like breath. One night, she dreamed of standing at the door itself, a vast circular gate of carved stone. On its surface, a spiral of small indentations glowed faintly. She raised her hand to touch one, and the hum began again. Not outside, but within her chest. She woke gasping, her bedsheets damp with sweat, though the night was cold. On her nightstand lay one of Luis's old notes, which she was sure she had left in the office. Across the top margin, in faint pencil, someone had written a new line in uneven handwriting. "The city remembers you too." She stopped going to work after that. Colleagues said she was ill. The archive issued a brief statement about medical leave. But one janitor later told a reporter that on her last night in the building, long after everyone had gone home, he'd heard a strange sound coming from the digitization lab, a low, pulsing hum that vibrated through the floor. When he entered, the room was empty. The monitors glowed faint blue, displaying a single image on loop: the spiral basin, illuminated from within, as if light were rising from beneath the ground. Weeks later, a rainstorm flooded part of the Piura coast. Locals found small pieces of pottery washed ashore. Clay tinted an impossible shade of blue. Scientists called it contamination from mining residue. The villagers didn't argue. They said the city below was breathing again. A few months after the flood, a new report reached the cultural ministry. Unsigned, no cover letter, only a map and a sentence typed neatly across the top. Kapakmire has awakened. The ministry dismissed it as a hoax. But on certain nights, when the river is still, fishermen say they hear a pulse beneath the water. 6 beats, pause, 3 beats, and see ripples forming circles that never reach the shore. Some swear they've seen a child walking along the shallows, carrying a light that doesn't flicker. They say he stops sometimes and looks toward the banks, as if waiting for someone to remember. By the time the ministry issued its official denial, the story had already spread beyond control. Local papers in Piura printed headlines about the Blue River phenomenon, and television crews arrived hoping for footage of glowing water. The government blocked access, citing contamination risks, but videos began circulating online. Grainy clips taken by fishermen showing ripples of faint light moving upstream against the current. In one, a pattern of luminous circles appeared briefly before vanishing into darkness. Scientists offered explanations: bioluminescent algae, magnetic sediment, faulty camera sensors. None held up under scrutiny. Every sample brought to laboratories lost its glow the moment it dried. Still, the fascination grew. Amateur historians linked the event to forgotten legends of the Rios Vivos, living rivers that remembered the dead. Conspiracy sites revived Santiago's name. They showed his drawings beside satellite images, claiming to see perfect correspondence. Someone even made a simulation of what Kapakmire might look like beneath the water. Shining towers, terraces of obsidian, a spiral plaza crowned by a single immense door. It might have ended there, in the endless churn of myth and algorithm, if not for what happened 2 years later. During a drought in 2032, the Piura River receded more than it had in half a century. Near the bend once called Rio Seco, villagers discovered a shallow depression, perfectly circular, about 10 meters wide. Its surface was dry but coated in a strange crystalline residue. When the sun hit it, the ground shimmered with a faint blue sheen. A drone video captured the image before officials sealed the area. At the center of that circle lay something small and incongruous. A notebook, waterlogged, its pages fused together, yet the first and last were still legible. On the inside cover, in faded ink, were 2 names: Santiago Lozano and Adriana Salazar. The last page bore a single line written in a careful, looping hand. Neither child's nor adult's, somewhere between. "We are all drawings waiting for the water to remember us." The notebook was taken to Lima for analysis. Then it vanished from the ministry's inventory. A clerk later claimed it had been transferred to the National Archives. The archives denied ever receiving it. After that, officials stopped speaking about Piura altogether. But travelers passing through the northern desert began telling new stories of strange tremors underfoot, of distant humming at night, of flickers of blue beneath the dust. Truck drivers claimed that sometimes, when headlights swept across the dunes, they revealed outlines of buildings where no town stood. Satellite scans began picking up intermittent anomalies, faint heat signatures, geometric and circular, appearing and disappearing like breath. Engineers dismissed them as errors in atmospheric calibration, yet one pattern persisted for weeks before vanishing again. A spiral 3 kilometers wide, pulsing faintly beneath the sand. That same year, the ministry received an encrypted email sent from an untraceable address. It contained a single attachment, an audio file. When opened, it played 10 seconds of low-frequency sound. 6 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Then silence. The file name was Door Open, Final.wave. No one ever claimed responsibility. The message was deleted from the servers, but the sound had already spread, shared, analyzed, remixed, forgotten, rediscovered. Someone uploaded it to a forum for unexplained phenomena, calling it the Song of the Drowned City. For most listeners, it was just a curiosity, another piece of digital folklore. But there are those who say that if you listen to it alone, with the lights off, you can hear something beneath the hum. The sound of water moving through corridors and the faint echo of a child's voice whispering, "Look at the drawing." And if you keep listening long enough, you may start to feel the rhythm inside your chest, matching your heartbeat, as if something old and patient is waiting beneath the ground for you to answer. Somewhere north, under layers of silt and silence, a city sleeps in blue light. Its door still open, its memory pulsing through those who dream of it. The river forgets nothing,